very warm welcome to another episode of ETCFO Presents ET Studio CFO Blueprint in association with SAP. I'm your host Divina Lasson, and on this episode, we delve into balancing risk and growth in the Indian startup ecosystem. Now, Indian startups must carefully balance innovation with stability. Managing financial risks, especially during rapid expansion, is key, ensuring liquidity and long-term sustainability. Handling regulatory risks, diversifying revenue streams, and much more is the order of the day in the Indian startup ecosystem. So stay tuned for an episode that uncovers the future of growth for Indian startups with esteemed guests. Joining us, Vijay YH, Head of Finance, Perfios, Adarsh Dikshit, Group CFO, Exotel, and Sandeep UP, CFO, SAP India. Right, gentlemen, very warm welcome to ET Studios. Thanks so much for joining. Such a pleasure to have you today.
Thank you. Thanks for having us here.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. And we're here to talk about a really interesting topic, which is how the Indian startup ecosystem can really look at balancing both their growth as well as the various risk factors. And who better to talk us through it than esteemed CFOs like yourselves? So let's kickstart this conversation. Vijay, could you start with giving us a little bit of context, a little bit of foundation setting on how you see the Indian startup ecosystem as it stands today? And what would you be your key pointers and your key advice when it comes to how they can balance growth as well as managing risk?
Sure. So I think one fundamental truth is when you're starting a new business, risk is always bound to be there.
Of course.
So obviously, in a startup, risks are bound to be there, and it is significantly high, I would say, because today there are so many startups. Some of the things that you can do to maintain a balance between growth and risks are, obviously in a startup, cash flow is a significant challenge in any startup for that matter. I think you'll have to manage cash flows effectively. I think make sure that you have sufficient runway for you to grow. Just to give an example, you had so many startups in 2019, right? There's so many startups, and then COVID hit everybody.
Yes.
So companies which actually did a fundraise just before COVID were able to actually see through the COVID period, and then some of those companies actually have done really well post the COVID era. But companies who did not have sufficient cash actually just disappeared, right? I think. Cash flow will need to be managed really effectively.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. Adarsh, let's get you in on this.
I think Vijay has covered most of the points. Perhaps I'll add one point to what he has said. In a startup world, growth and risk are hand in glove.
Yes.
There is no startup. In fact, startup cannot exist and cannot grow if they don't assume the risk. Because most of the startups are pivoting, repivoting, indexing, reindexing, solving newer problems, finding reasons for existence and grow. And when you're in an uncertain environment, you have no choice than to take risk to grow. So to that extent, I don't think so one can shy away from the fact that there is a disproportionate risk in a startup.
Yes.
Vijay spoke about managing cash. I think to add on to what Vijay said, it's also about how forward-looking are you in your capital allocation.
Yeah.
So if in the event, let's say you start the year saying that this is the area that you want to invest and grow, then you allocate the capital in that area. An ideal way is that you go through the course to realize that it really has not paid off and then you repivot. But that doesn't work in a startup because you have to constantly repivot.
Yes.
Which means you have to revisit your capital allocation at far higher frequency than otherwise you would do. Which means as a CFO, your ability to integrate with understanding of the business, understanding of the markets, how they change, and translate that back into how you're going to allocate and reallocate the capital, that becomes extremely important.
Absolutely.
I think is one of the levers that you have to manage risk. But having said that, startups inherently are risky. I don't think so one can take away that fact at all.
Yeah.
They'll continue to remain risky for considerable period of time till they reach that level of maturity, which is certainly not soon. That's my opinion.
Absolutely. And we're going to deep dive into a lot of these challenges that you've just put out there. So thanks for that. But before that, Sandeep, let's get you in on this now. You have a very interesting vantage point because you work with companies across industries, across scale, across geographies. So in your experience, what really does it mean for the Indian startup today to look at both balancing their growth, risk factors, but also in general, what is the landscape looking like at this moment in your experience?
Yeah, sure. Like my other panelists said, we are seeing a lot of challenges, but those challenges also create opportunity. You spoke about COVID, for me, I've seen during COVID, a lot of startups starting their
Yes.
thing. So that
Right.
itself creates opportunity, and I've seen that coming. Yes, cash flow issues where these things come up. But what I also see is that when do you adopt that technology? Because you have to plan for scale. And if you delay your adoption of technology, I think when you grow, you will have no time to manage that.
Sure.
So for me, I consider that as an important thing. And as CFOs, I think we play that role, right? Because wherever you have a risk, there is growth, and wherever there is growth, there is a risk. So we as CFOs, we are expected to play that role, make that balancing, and see when to say no. So there could be an opportunity for us where we may have to say no to that opportunity, because the risk will overweigh the opportunity. I think that's where we play that role. And I think especially in the Indian setup right now, it's all looking good.
Yes, yes. Okay, we're going to deep dive on the technology point as well. But, before that, Vijay, so let's get a little bit deeper now on some of the very unique risk factors that exist in the Indian startup ecosystem. Can you tell us a little bit about a few of the key ones and what you would say are some of the solutions and some of the prescriptions, rather, for our viewers today on how to deal with them?
Sure. See, like I said, like I spoke about cash flow, one of the biggest challenges startups have is basically all of them have limited funding, right? Investors basically they expect exponential growth from all startups, right? And so the management team is always under pressure to show good revenue growth all the time, and with limited funding, right? So how do you do that? I think that is a very unique challenge and a difficult one to manage, because I think there are different industries. For example, in a B2C industry, you have to really spend a lot of money to get customers, right? If you want to get retail customers, you really have to spend a lot. So how much do you spend, and for how long do you continue to spend? I think these are very big challenges, which I think the teams have to kind of think through.
Seen across the board, across industries.
Absolutely.
Across the nature of the startup. Yeah, absolutely. Really valid there. Adarsh, anything you'd like to add to this? And of course, no conversation on risk factors can be spoken about without talking about compliance issues, regulatory requirements. What, in your opinion, are some of the really big ones out there that startups are looking at today?
So I'll come back to the specific question in terms of compliance and regulation, but I think to the first question that you asked, I do have a point of view. So maybe I'll add to what Vijay said.
Please.
And perhaps I'll make it more general in my response. So if we really pinpoint the risk to the startup, you can actually categorize them as risk from a demand point of view, risk from a supply standpoint of view, and risk from the availability of the capital standpoint of view. These three actually becomes very important factors. I'm talking about highest level of aggregation. Demand risk shifts very quickly for us because we are in a space where we are experimenting. We don't know whether our products are going to succeed because we go with an ideation that, this is how we're going to solve your problem. And therefore, we create a demand that doesn't even exist.
Yes.
So we don't know how it's going to play out. Maybe it can play out very well, or it may not necessarily play out very well. And you need to then figure out what next for you. So that's how the uncertainty and risk comes from the demand standpoint of view.
Yes.
And the supply standpoint of view, I would say that most of the startups don't operate at a scale. So as a consequence, their ability to leverage price, their ability to attract talent will certainly be quite limited compared to mature companies such as SAP.
Yeah.
So there is the supply side risk also, which you have to constantly balance. So the demand side, supply side, and then the availability of the capital, which is what Vijay was referring to, say that you need to have adequate runway, make sure that, you don't really land up in a situation where you have to go and raise additional capital midway through. It's like changing your tires when you're flying kind of a scenario. Those are my additional points to what Vijay said. And coming back to regulatory and compliance, I would say most of the startups, for them, regulatory and compliance is the last thing on the list. Because the first priority is survival.
Yeah.
I mean, you're fighting on a daily basis to survive. So when you're fighting for your survival, you really will not say, have I paid my taxes on time? Have I ticked all the boxes on the time? So for us as a CFOs, the biggest challenge is not as much as the regulatory risk. And I must admit, unlike perhaps what it was a decade ago, Indian regulatory setup is far more predictable, far more stable. Right. Of course, we do have here and there situations where unexpected changes do happen in regulations. But I would say by far, the regulatory landscape in India has changed quite a bit. It's not as bad as it used to be perhaps 10 years back. So I think from our point of view, regulatory and compliance is not, we don't know what we don't know. It is about we know, but can we comply with it or not? Cost of compliance is quite high. That's how I would perhaps give my point of view on the compliance and regulatory part.
All right.
That's how I do.
Just to add to, I think, what Adarsh said on the compliance piece. See, I think Adarsh said, there are not too many challenges from a compliance standpoint, actually, because startups are not really, they're all private companies mostly. So from a compliance standpoint, I think there are not very few regulations that would be applicable. But but the one thing that everybody, investors and everybody else would expect is, the corporate governance standards, right? I think governance has to be really, is what everybody looks up to. I think, and this is something which the management team, the founders have to really, they have to set the bar really high on governance.
Absolutely.
Because there can be no compromise on the governance standards, right? Because the moment the governance standards are compromised, the confidence, the trust factor goes away, I think. So that, I think, is really key. Need to make sure that the communication with the investors is very, very transparent and very honest. That goes on to build long-term trust and confidence with the investors. I think that, I would say, is really important.
Yeah, wonderful.
A little bit contradictory to what you said. I just was reading a report. This is not India specific, but I saw it says that almost 50%, close to 50% of startups shut in 5 years because of compliance, non-compliance. So that was startling information for me.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think Vijay brought a point which is quite close to my heart as well when I said this. So when he talks about corporate governance, I guess it's not just about ticking the boxes so far as paying the taxes on time or filing all the regulatory returns on time. It's also about how transparent you are with your stakeholders. Corporate governance that he speaks, and perhaps that's what I'm also speaking, or rather that's what he's speaking at, what I want to speak about is the level of transparency that founders have to bring with their board. I think that has to go up several notches.
Yes, all right.
For this ecosystem to thrive, it's extremely important. I think today, I would say that ecosystem, perhaps, obviously every ecosystem has bad apples. Unfortunately, we have seen those bad apples coming to limelight now in the recent past. That just underscores the point that your corporate governance with your stakeholders have to be spotless. We'll all make mistakes. It's much better to go upfront, disclose. And my own experience with the culture that I come from, I'm proud to say that happens.
Excellent.
We are upfront in disclosing it's not going to happen, or we have done this mistake, blah blah. I think that's the most important thing.
Excellent. Absolutely. I mean, you raised such an important point here, which is the culture of the organization, right? So as CFOs, what would you say it really takes to ensure that your organization does instill that culture at a very DNA level? Of course, ensuring governance and compliance matters are in order, but just in general, being a risk-ready, a risk-prepared, and of course, ultimately risk-averse organization. How does it really get to the DNA of the organization?
This culture starts with the founders. As much as the CFOs have to play, which I'll speak more about it, but the culture starts with the founders.
Sure.
If you have founders who are coming with that mindset to say that I'm going to do clean business, I would say half the battle is won.
Right.
The other half of the battle where CFOs actually have to play is, it's about putting the spotlight and raising the decibel levels on the topic.
Yes.
You will always be pushed back. There's never a day where if you, as a CFO, you bring up and say this compliance is required or this is not according to the strict corporate governance standards, the business will always push you back. Not because they have an intention to actually not comply. It's because their first priority is to deliver the business.
Right, yes.
And their mind and soul is all about that. So the CFO's responsibility is to withstand that, show objectivity and resilience and leadership to hold their ground and say, this is what is, it's doable, not doable. And and then leave it to the board to make the decision.
Absolutely.
But raise the decibel levels to the board.
Yes, it all starts from the top.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Wonderful. Thank you. Vijay, anything like that?
I think some of the standards have to be set by the founders. But I think some of the other things that you can do from a risk management standpoint, I think some of the large listed companies have a very good ERM framework and they also publish it as part of their annual reports. So this is something that which some of the startups can also look to adopt to manage risk better.
Yes.
So basically listed all the risks. So broadly, there are 4 categories of risk, right? One is the strategic risk, you have financial risk, and then you have compliance and operational risk. And then you basically basically list out all the risks within each of these broad categories and then say what are you doing to mitigate or manage this risk. And so that way you know what are the risks which you have, and then you also report this to the management and the board from a time to time basis. So that way you know what are risks which you're taking, where are you, what are you doing to mitigate those risks. And then from an overall risk management standpoint, you have a lot more control, I would say.
Absolutely. So sort of address each zone categorically and ensure each box is ticked. Wonderful. Sandeep, let's come to you now, because of course you kickstarted this conversation talking about also the role of technology in all of this, right? So can you take us through some of the tools, some of the frameworks, some of the important solutions that SAP offers to the startup community today to really help deal with all the risk factors we've been talking about in this conversation?
Maybe one word about compliance. I always tell this, my former manager used to say compliance 100 is 100, 99.99 is 0. I think that
nice.
I always hold that because that is true. It's either 0 or 100. There's nothing in between.
Precision is a must.
So when you talk about solutions, again, he briefly touched about ERM. So enterprise risk management, that is something that we use because that is something which sort of identifies the risk, it analyzes, it monitors, and it also reports. So basically the framework helps to ensure that broadly every risk is covered. And then of course there is this GRC, the governance, reporting and compliance. Again, we spoke about corporate governance. So every company will have their own corporate governance, their own principles of working. So this framework helps to ensure that the company is following those principles, they're adhering to those norms. So it just sets the house in order.
Yes.
And then again we spoke about risk, any type of risk, whether it is operational risk, whether it is financial risk, or any other risk that we are talking about, it is covered in this framework. And then the compliance. So this sort of covers all the regulatory compliance that is there. Then we have this tax compliance, takes care of the tax part. Then we have cyber security, which is the most happening thing, right? We saw every day some other system going down because of some attacks.
Yes.
So cyber security helps us on various cyber attacks, whether it is the IoT, whether it is application security, whether it is the critical infrastructure security, it covers all of those. So as CFOs, we all use procurement tools, right? We have this, we use Ariba. So we have an interesting solution there, which is the supply risk management.
Okay.
There, what they do is any risk which is identified with the supply across the globe, it populates that risk. It could be any kind of risk, whether it is reputational risk, any bad risk, it gets updated. And we have the tie-up with like D&B. This is updated sort of every 30 minutes, so that whatever data you're seeing is live. So you have all those covered. And again, sustainability is the most talked about.
Yes.
Any vendor doing any malpractice in terms of reporting a CO2 or showing some other incorrect information, it gets captured. So overall, it covers all of those things. Again, if I talk about the T&D, which is one of the biggest expense line item in our P&L. So we have this AI embedded into that, which sort of covers this fraud detection, any invoice tamper. This is covered in that. So overall, I think there are many of them, but I'm talking about a few that I see on a daily basis.
Yeah, wonderful. And once again, you've touched on something so important. I'm sure all of you would have something to add to the role of emerging technologies here, right? I mean, no conversation on growth or risk mitigation development can be had without talking about the role of Gen AI, AI, and all kinds of emerging tech. How do you see this really being integrated into the, let's say, the startup ecosystem, how they approach growth, how they approach the tools for growth and compliance at the end of the day? If you'd like to. Jay, anything like that?
Yeah, I think startups today, like I said, have very limited funding, right? So they have to make the most of technology. I think so it becomes imperative for them to have the best technology, and because it's also so rapidly evolving, right? So there are so many startups coming up every day, and the whole landscape is such that there are so many changes happening. So you have to have the latest technology.
Absolutely.
Today, everybody's talking about AI. You see, every other startup is an AI company, right? So you have to be on the latest technology, I think, to be able to cater to the needs of its customers.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, Adarsh?
I think startups have a unique advantage in terms of adopting AI, and I'll give you a reason for it. Startups, by their very nature, look at the problem far more closely and very differently than a mature company.
Okay, true.
So their ability to see a solution that is differentiated, because unless they offer something that is differentiated, that is unique, they will not really be able to establish themselves.
Yes.
So one way to offer the differentiation and uniqueness is how can you adopt any new technology. Of course, today we all speak about Gen AI. So while there's a lot being said about Gen AI in terms of it's expensive, etc., but I guess Gen AI becomes more open source as we speak.
Yes.
So our ability for startups' ability to experiment and include those in their products and services is certainly unique. Will they succeed? Can they operate at scale? Only time can tell. And maybe few startups can, and many startups cannot. But I think it is this creative destruction that is going to give rise to perhaps 1-2 companies that perhaps will be far ahead in terms of adopting the Gen AI.
Sure.
So there will be companies in maybe 5 years from now in India where you will actually see that we probably will be the most innovative companies to adopt Gen AI. But there will be few, but those will come from the rest that will go the burial ground.
Yes. Very interesting. Thank you. Sandeep?
Yeah, so for me, being in the technology company itself, AI has to be a part of the DNA. So whatever we do, AI has to be a part of it. And especially people like us, we are not the Gen Zs, or we are not the latest guys. So we'll have to adopt ourselves faster.
Sure.
So because we are a little bit traditional people, and that's what I've seen. We have to sort of adopt fast. And again, what I see is that unless you are able to adopt fast, unless you are able to learn those fast, I think you become irrelevant. And again, technology is evolving so fast. You adopt something today, and like within 6 months, you feel it's outdated. You are supposed to go to the next one. So, and again, if you see the attacks as well, whatever you see, they are most sophisticated.
Absolutely.
So you have no choice but to upgrade yourself.
Yep.
So I think overall, as technology plays a part, people play a big part in this. And of course, the systems, everything has to be in order to sort of address this.
Absolutely, yeah. It's the order of the day now today. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your insights. Before we wrap up, I'll request each of you to leave our viewers today with one key takeaway for all our financial leaders out there watching this content. When it comes to potentially being a CFO or a financial leader in a growing organization, when they're facing the challenges, when they're facing the risk factors, everything we've discussed today, what are some of the tips that you leave for the leaders or the leaders in the making? Vijay?
So I think risk, I think when you're running a business, risk is bound to be there. Risk is inherent in any business. Risk management, I think, is all about taking a calculated risk and being able to embrace the final outcome. I think if something goes wrong, you should be able to embrace the outcome, right? Yeah, risk management is all about being able to take a calculated risk and then being able to face the consequences if things don't go your way.
Yes, so absolutely wonderful. Thank you. Others?
I think most of the aspiring finance leaders, the younger generation, I think they're all very smart people.
Sure.
And they have good solid grounding of finance. There is nothing new that you have to bring to the table.
There's a lot of wisdom for seasoned CFOs like yourself.
I think most of them are inherently smart. They obviously come from a generation that understands the technology better. So the piece that I can offer as my experience, not as much in the advice, is knowledge and the point you made, right? Wisdom are two different things. Wisdom comes with experience.
Yes.
And knowledge is an accumulation. Wisdom is application. They're two different things. For people who are aspiring to be leaders, finance leaders or otherwise, their ability to gain experience in business is extremely important. Unless you understand the business from the business leader angle, from the customer angle, from the markets angle, from the competition angle, your ability to translate numbers and give a business story around it is severely handicapped.
Sure. Yes.
So I think that's the piece that probably maybe I didn't do a great job, if I can say that. But if there is anything that somebody wants to take from our failures and make an experience out of it, I would say that piece. They have to spend a lot of time in business.
Wonderful. Absolutely.
Just to add to what Adarsh said, I think today the role of the CFO is changing. So previously predominant in the traditional, previous days, the role of the CFO was the traditional role. He was more of an accountant. He was more of a finance guy. Basically report the numbers, see what is okay, what is not okay, track the financial performance and report to the board, right? So it's more of a traditional role. Today, like Adarsh said, the CFO's role is more of a enabling business role. You have to enable the business. As a finance leader, you are there to help the business. You are there to help the business grow, right? And risk management, in a way, should see risk management as a positive step, right? So risk management helps the business grow. It is not about slowing down the business. It is actually about taking calculated risk and then helping the business grow.
Yes.
So that is how I would see it.
Wonderful. Thank you. Sandeep?
We are not only responsible for finance, that is one of the functions today, but we have a lot of other things to do, and we are closer to the CEO in terms of strategy. So we know everything. So for me, if you have that, we are able to manage things properly. And then I would say, I would call it as 3 T's for me: transformation, technology, and talent. Transformation, where we focus on people, process, and system. I think that's an ongoing exercise. You have to keep yourself updated.
Absolutely.
So that is an ongoing exercise. People, if you have to get a thing done, you need to get those skilled people and you have to retain them as well. Today, that is a challenge. You need to ensure that it is done. Technology, of course, we all spoke about.
Yes.
And the last part for me is how do we ensure all this? Because today, are we really empowering people to do enough, and are we able to retain them? So I think in our role, if we are able to empower people to take decisions, because people are the ones who create the risk and they are the ones who are going to mitigate the risk as well. So for me, if you're able to empower them and take those decisions and give them adequate training throughout the thing, I think we can be successful in managing the risks and growth. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think, like Sandeep said, CFOs today are at a great vantage point. They are able to see the end-to-end view of the business. So I think next to the CEO, it's only the CFO who have this vantage point. And that is why you would see a lot of CFOs actually going to become CEOs, right? I think
that's the trend now, absolutely.
Yeah. So I think CFOs becomes more imperative that they actually help the business grow and they actually enable the business, because they are at such a great vantage point wherein they can see everything and they understand the business as well.
Yes, absolutely. Wonderful. Gentlemen, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing all your insights, all your wisdom, all your experience. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for being on ET Studios.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, on that note, we conclude this episode of ETCFO Presents ET Studio CFO Blueprint in association with SAP. But do join us next time as we continue to decode the strategies and insights that define the modern financial leadership. Remember, the blueprint for growth starts with the CFO. Until next time, many thanks for watching.